too long, and I believe that there is now a need for you, Minister, to get involved and to ensure that it comes to fruition sooner rather than later. Secondly, I would ask that the HR issues relative to Cork Institute of Technology, now with the MUT, that those issues be resolved. I know that there's whistleblower and other issues still outstanding, and I think it's high time that the colleges were forced to deal with the issues so that the colleges can, the new entities can move on without looking over their shoulder and ensuring that all of these issues are dealt with. That will require money, input from your department and leadership in that area.
The second part.
Just on the 2 points, I'd like to thank the Deputy for making direct contact with me on these issues as well. And there's momentum now with the Technological University process for the South East. There will be no question mark around the momentum in terms of the momentum at an official level, but also at a financial level as well. We want to get the South East on the same plane as Technological University of Dublin and also Munster Technological University, the Connacht Ulster Alliance, the Limerick Athlone Alliance as well. There's funding already provided for those processes. So just to let you know that I spoke to my officials about it last week as well, Deputy, and it will be kept very much on the radar. And I've raised the HR issues with my officials, and they'll come back with a report on that.
Party Sinn Féin siad na cóir ceisneis dús mas an Donegal agus a griant ama.
Le deputies Colnan agus function shocked car agus car. Minister, I'll start on the same subject that I started with when we last had a debate a little under 2 weeks ago, I think. At that stage, I told you that I felt it wasn't good enough that schools had had no communication on reopening of schools from March the 12th until that date. Now, since then, while there's been a lot of discussion on this, in some respects we're not much wiser. Confusion reigned last Thursday and Friday. We told Sarah McInerney at 10 that blended learning would be a reality, then went on to prime time and told us that you wouldn't accept a half return to school. And then the Taoiseach the following day seemed to revert to the previous position, telling us that not all students would return, at least at the same time. And now you're saying that you're going for the maximum return of students. So, while obviously it's welcome that we know that it's still the plan to return to school on a normal date, neither parents nor teachers know exactly what that means. The reality is that we have the most overcrowded classrooms in Europe anyway, already, 28 children to a teacher, and that will make our return to school buildings far harder than in most states. It's an indictment of the governments of recent years that we are in this position. Parents know that, but they're frustrated and they're anxious, and they want to see education returning to something like normality. And despite everyone's best efforts, and I want to acknowledge once again the incredible work being done by teachers and principals and their staff, it is a fact that children have lost out, particularly students from disadvantaged backgrounds and children with special education needs. Many of them are struggling desperately with the changed routine, the lack of socialisation and stimulation. It has meant that they have fallen back. There was one case that I saw that just that stayed with me that I saw on RTE of Zoe Hines, who had progressed to be able to spoon feed herself but can no longer do so due to the lack of contact. I see we have a dedicated debate on the July education programme next week, and I look forward to that. But this needs to be a big priority for the standard school year as well, Minister. So, Minister, my questions. In relation to the reopening schools, has the Department now at this stage communicated directly with all schools on the reopening of school buildings? And will the Minister speak frankly on this occasion whether the reopening will be full or phased? I think parents deserve an honest answer. If there's going to be phasing, then tell us, please. I'll come back with more questions.
Very clear around the public commentary in relation to school reopenings. If the current health guidelines stay as they are, we are in a position, we're in a position where you'll be looking at a partial reopening. But if you listen carefully what I had to say in my public commentary, I am working with, through my officials, through the public health officials in the Department of Health, to look at different advice, which they're learning all the time from European international experience, and monitoring that advice. So I'm confident, and to say publicly here today, Deputy, I'm confident that that advice will change. And I'm also in a position to say we will be in a better position before I make the announcement at Cabinet as to what that advice will be. So it was very, very clear what I said. The modelling we did around current health advice would mean a partial return. But because we are engaged with the health officials, because we're constantly getting new evidence, we're learning from the likes of Denmark, who have primary school children back. We're learning from Greece, we're learning from France, who have 15 back in the classroom, 15 students back. I'm learning from the likes of England, Gavin Williamson, who I was speaking to 2 weeks ago, learning from the likes of Minister Weir in Northern Ireland, who I spoke to yesterday. So we're going to learn from those experiences, and just to reassure people that it's our intention in the Department of Education to maximise the return of students back in the end of August and September. There's no ambiguity around that. That is our intention, but obviously we're going to be guided completely by the health advice. But at the same time, the health advice was very, very clear. When Dr. Tony Holohan briefed us recently, he said it's their job to give advice and guidance. It's not their job to do a risk assessment, and obviously that is the job we're doing now. And the time frame, and I know you said schools haven't been notified. The reason why schools haven't been notified yet is because we're waiting on this advice. I'll bring a memo to Cabinet next week, and after next week, at that time, I'll publish the advice, and that's when the principals and leadership in the schools will find out.
It's all very well, but some communication should have been possible, at least since the 12th of March. Schools deserve some kind of communication, some kind of indication. I think that they should have got that, and they still haven't got that, so far as I'm aware. Staying with the reopening is...
That's not true. There's ongoing communication.
Any school I've spoken to has not had direct contact from the department on reopening. They may have in the last 4 or 5 days, but up till then, they hadn't received any contact. I'm telling you that as a fact with any school I've spoken to, and I've spoken to about 20. Staying with the reopening...
But can I just ask a question back? Like, if we don't have the advice, if we don't have the guidelines, if we don't have the instruction, I'm not going to go back to principals with a half story. Next week we will have the full guidance on the publication.
Sorry, no, Minister, I think it is quite reasonable that you go back to schools and you say, look, this is the process, this is what we are, this is where we're waiting for, this is the criteria. There is things that you can. There is messages
yes,
and preparations that could have happened.
There is. No, it's wrong to say there's no communication between schools. The schools and the school representative bodies are in constant engagement. That is not true. There is engagement. What I'm saying here very clearly, in terms of what September, the end of August, September will look like, we're not in a position until next Friday.
Lig didn't talk to Keshtakor.
Yeah, I'm going to have to truncate the rest of my contribution. Unfortunately, I was going to come in on a few issues. First of all, calculated grades, Minister. PQs that I'm getting back today, that I got back today, tell me quite clearly 2 things. If you can't get a calculated grade, there is no other option. There's not going to be a written leaving cert before 3rd level admissions. Those students who can't get calculated grades, they deserve some kind of plan B. It's a small cohort. I believe something should be done for them. Whether it's an online assessment or oral or something like that, something has to be done for them. It's unfair that they could potentially miss out on a year of 3rd level. Minister, I've written to you asking for the exact statistical model for the school profiling. If you can respond to that, please. There's also, Minister, about 800 schools listed as requiring additional accommodation. Many of them are or were going through planning before that was slowed down by COVID. One of them is a new school in my own constituency, Southly Educate Together. It's in its 2nd year. They may not get planning in time to deliver the accommodation that they need. Can you ask local authorities to prioritise these applications? And then finally, Minister, it's reported that 25 million additional will be needed for schools for hygiene. Parents are already having to pay maybe €10 a month or €100 a year for the cleaning of schools because schools are underfunded. Minister, I ask you, please provide the funding or I predict that it will be passed on to parents who are already hard-pressed. I'm afraid they'll have to be responded to.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thanks, Minister. I have 4 minutes. I have one very specific issue to raise with you, and hopefully you'll have the time to respond. So it's in relation to the lack of secondary school places in Kilkenny City, and it's in particular to 3 boys who I know I have spoken to yourself and your officials already about this, and I have gotten a response. But I have the permission of the families to raise this issue. So 3 individual families, Zach, Cahill and Aboudi, 3 young young boys, all going to St Canice's Primary School in Kilkenny City, cannot access a secondary school place for September in the city. Now, they're in a situation where their families, in 2 of the cases, mothers don't drive and fathers are working away from home. And in one of the cases, both parents are working in the hospital, are on call and have difficult hours, and other kids. So the idea of sending your children outside the city, first of all, for schooling is not ideal. However, when we raised this issue, Minister, I got a reply back to say that they were entitled to appeal the decision. So we went through that process, and they received replies from the Department of Education to say the appeals weren't accepted because they were out of time. Now, bear in mind, we had the whole COVID situation, and school places for secondary are usually announced in February and March. So the stress that these 3 families are under, and I stress that it's only 3 because I imagine there's a lot more, because every year in Kilkenny we have this issue. There is a need for a secondary school. So the 2 things I want to ask you are, will you please give a commitment to look into these 3 individual cases? Your department has the information. I did ask them last week what happens when they are told they cannot appeal now. I didn't get a reply to that. But I don't really want them to just go through some appeal process if it's not really going to result in anything. So can something be done to help these 3 families? You have this 3 kids who, like all the other kids who are in 6th class, have not got the opportunity to have the whole finishing up and saying goodbye to friends. They're at a stage in their life where they should be excited about the next chapter. They don't even know what school they're going to. We're in June now. Secondary school is restarting in some shape or form at the end of August. So they really, really need some sort of help and intervention. I mean, you have one of these children saying to me, he's nervous, he'll have no friends, he's not going to know anybody. And the other thing to say is, when they did look into schools outside the city, they were told they were not entitled to transport, because you're seen as technically sending your children outside the catchment area, and that causes its whole bunch of problems. The other thing I want to raise about this is, I would like to explore how we get another secondary school in Kilkenny City. On the eastern part of the city, there is no second level education. We don't have an Educate Together secondary school. I think this could be a good opportunity for something like that, and I think it would take pressure off all the secondary schools in the city. And I don't really want to have to be talking about this, and I'm sure you don't want to have to be talking about this year in, year out. So I would like to be part of the long-term solution and see, is there some way that I can meet with people in your department around how we explore another secondary school in the city. That will not help these 3 children, Zach, Cahill and Aboudi, and I would like somebody from the department to please look into this and realise the stress, the worry, the anxiety that parents and these kids are under. And it's not a nice time. My own son started secondary school last year. I know the nervousness that's there anyway, and that's when you know everything about your school and your uniform and all the rest of it that goes with it for that age group. And it does seem to, unfortunately, be particularly affecting boys in the primary schools in Kilkenny City, that there is not enough secondary school places. So I just ask if you could please look into that, Minister.
Yeah, I have 4 minutes, so I'll take 2 minutes, Minister, and I believe you have 2 minutes to respond. I know there's lots of questions in that. I want to follow on from the question that was asked by Deputy McGuinness in relation to the technological university status for the South East. And you said in response, Minister, that your department is working on this and you want to see this progressed. I can tell you that since 2011, when I was first elected to the Shannon, on a monthly basis, if not sometimes on a weekly basis, I've been raising this issue. 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and we're still no closer to a resolution. And people in the South East can see other consortiums powering ahead. The South East is the only region without a university. It's an unlevel playing field. It needs to be sorted out. And whatever impediments, whatever roadblocks are there, Minister, your department and you have to play a part in resolving that. Now, there is a meeting taking place tomorrow at my behest, where the local Oireachtas members are doing a meeting with the 2 presidents of the institutes, and we'll do our best. But the department has an obvious role to play here. There's also concerns about the Munster consortium, and we're being asked questions in relation to whether or not this consortium had a successful panel visit. We know there was a panel visit a panel report in April and March of 2019, and potentially a second panel report in February of this year. So the questions are being asked as whether or not there was a successful panel, because the first panel report last year was quite critical of the application and saying that it didn't meet the criteria in a whole range of areas. So legitimate questions are being asked. Did that consortium meet the criteria, or was the criteria bypassed? Which I think would be an incredible situation that we will find ourselves in. But in relation to the South East Consortium, and Munster and Waterford. It's hugely important, Minister. You should know that. For a region that lags behind economically, where we have one of the highest levels of unemployment, we need this. And we shouldn't have to come in here week after week, month after month, year after year, pleading the case and still being the only region that doesn't have a university. So I'm asking your department to sort this out and look at whatever impediments are there and play your part to make sure that those issues are resolved.
Yeah, look, I'm glad to hear you're meeting collectively with both presidents, and I'd like to take this opportunity to acknowledge their individual roles in bringing it to this stage. They're in the process of preparing an application. They're in the process of doing that this year, even amidst all the uncertainty and all the difficulties and challenges we have at the moment. And there have been roadblocks, as you'll know, along the way, and there have been challenges in relation to the process for the South East. But the university desire amongst the community in the South East, it's there from, you know more about it, you live there, we've heard that, we know about it. So just to reassure you, and you'll find out tomorrow that from the presidents, if you're meeting them, that not alone is the momentum there, the commitment's there. There's no issue around funding that will be needed to bring that process along. You mentioned Munster Technological University. I've formally written to them. They've obviously, there were issues that needed to be addressed. They were addressed. They're looking at a designated start date of the 1st of January 2021. So this, we want to get all the different consortiums, be it Connacht Ulster Alliance, Athlone, Limerick, or also for South East between Carlow and Waterford as well. But they're in a very, very strong position. They're in the middle of preparing their application, and there will be progress.
Consortium. So can they be made public so we can see that it was a transparent process? I'm not saying it wasn't, but the questions are being asked. It would be helpful if we could actually see those panel reports.
Yeah, I can certainly ask my officials. Yeah.
Thank you.
That Sinn Féin slot is over. Mátá Ceisna Cortha ar an féidir leat ar the ain party beidir fécin ortha agus freagra hort iscríbhín.
Yeah, but
I'm asking if questions have been put here where they haven't, he hasn't been able to reach, that he'd give an answer in writing, as he said that. The next slot is a 10-minute slot for Fine Gael, and the first deputy is Deputy Alan Dillon. I know this will be his maiden speech. All right, lad.
Guramahaguds Cohirlock. I'll be sharing my time with Deputy Feehan. It is a true honour to speak in Dáil Éireann for the first time. From the outset, I wish to sincerely thank the people of Mayo for placing their trust in me as we navigate these unprecedented times in circumstances I could have never have imagined. I hope to serve my constituents with honour, integrity and humility, and I want to assure the Mayo electorate that I will continue the work of my predecessor Enda Kenny with the same ethos as he entered this chamber on his first day as a Teachta Dála by serving the greatest number with the greatest good. I have always said that what matters to Mayo matters to me, and as a new Teachta Dála, I want to extend my thanks to the staff of the House of the Oireachtas for the courtesy and professionalism they've shown me to date. I would like to acknowledge the efforts that individuals and families in every community are making against COVID-19. However, some have suffered privately following the loss of family members or friends, and I extend my heartfelt sympathies to those people. I commend Minister McHugh, his department officials, and in particular our teachers and students around the country. They all have adapted incredibly quickly to their virtual working and educational environments. I regularly speak to local teachers, and the topic of most importance has been the Leaving Cert, which we have now greater clarity on over the past few weeks. However, it is the next steps facing today's Leaving Cert students for those who wish to pursue higher education and what awaits them in September. This time of year usually represents a rite of passage for our young people finishing their second-level education. I am hoping that some level of normality can be brought to their next chapter for those choosing to enter higher education. As Minister McHugh may be aware, on Tuesday, the Connacht Ulster Alliance announced the appointment of a new executive project lead with the aim of progressing technological university in the West and Northwest. This is a progressive step forward for the region's higher education institutes, including the Mayo campus of Galway Mayo Institute of Technology at Castlebar, as well as Letterkenny IT in the Minister's own constituency. In addition, as a STEM ambassador as one who is a qualified teacher and who has worked within the pharmaceutical and biopharma sector, I have worked closely with many students, encouraging them to consider careers in science, technology, engineering and mathematics sector. It would not be unreasonable to assume a spike in applications in the Central Applications Office in these areas of study, which have played a key role in the fight against Covid-19. Therefore, I am hoping the Minister may provide some clarity on what Leaving Cert students can expect and when detailed information will become available as part of the third level entry process.
Dr. Field.
Thank you, Minister. I also would like to follow with my colleague, Deputy Dillon, and congratulate him on his maiden speech here in the Dáil, and I wish you every success and it's nice to see a man from the west of Ireland. Minister, following up on Deputy Dillon's issue, Minister, do you have an update on the TU application for Sligo and indeed the west and northwest, and do you think it will be submitted before the end of the year? And I just want to welcome Dáil Donnellan to the Board of IT in Sligo. I think he's an excellent appointment and I wish him well in the work that he's doing. Minister, I have two issues here. There's a few issues regarding national schools, and one is the hygiene standards in national schools, especially with COVID, and a lot of them are we taking into consideration now that some of them just have sinks and maybe don't have the proper hygiene standards to match COVID that only came in a few months ago? What are the department doing there? And also, Minister, there's Cairns National School in Grange in County Sligo. It's on the N15 between Grange and Clifton. You pass by it virtually every day, I'm sure. They've applied for, or they've been granted an 80 square metre additional classroom, and a completed tender process is sorted. But they're awaiting written confirmation to proceed construction to sign the contract during the summer. Just, I know it's a bit, but if there's any issues, there's issues there as well. And finally, Minister, especially with COVID and Brexit, you know, we talk about an all-island basis and an all, you know, an east-west, and there's a lot of work to be done. What discussions have you had with the Minister of Education in the North, you know, to talk about mitigating Brexit effectively, but also the COVID issue, because we are talking about an all-island basis, and I'd be interested to find out exactly what you're doing. And finally, Minister, in another constituency that I was in, I'm delighted that Dangan National School in Kilmore, of which you're familiar with as well, that got to go ahead to start construction of their much-awaited new extension. Thank you, Minister.
Gormargad, Cahirle, Coargus Hig Chaka Dillon. Congratulations to Deputy Dillon on his election and on his maiden speech today. He referenced the clarity, his last point, clarity around the Leaving Cert. Our ambition now that the school alignment process has started. We've set up the portal. The portal will be going live from between the Executive Office and the Department and the schools, and we're looking to trigger that on Monday so that the schools can start feeding back information. So there has been a great degree of momentum at that level, at a school alignment level. There's obviously a lot of work still to go. My ambition has always been, and still is, that we have results coming out as close to the traditional date as possible, the normal date for the Leaving Cert results. So that is the ambition. I know I'll work intensely with my officials to make sure that this happens. And it's really, really important on a number of fronts, that transition to third level, but also I'm conscious of the transition through UCAS as well, whether it's Northern Ireland, England, Scotland or Wales, or indeed going to Europe, where the majority of our students last year went to the Netherlands. So we're ongoing engagement with our European counterparts. And to take part of Deputy Feehan's question on my engagement with the Minister Peter Weir in the North, I just spoke to him yesterday, raised the issue of UCAS and ensuring that we have those deadlines, but one of the things that I'm picking up from the officialdom within the UK Department of Education, from my own contact and from engagement with my own officials and their officials, and my engagement with Minister Gavin Williamson, that there is a flexibility there, and we will continue to work with them on that. You also raised the issue of the Mayo campus and the importance of Mayo campus, and I know you've raised it a number of times with me, and the integral connection there between Galway, Mayo, Sligo and Donegal in relation to the new Connacht-Ulster alliance. And to Deputy Feehan's question, an update on that alliance, you're correct in saying that Dr Sean Duffy has been appointed and has been working closely with the 3 colleges in ensuring that the preparatory work that's needed for an application to be submitted is on track, and we'll be looking at an application being submitted for the Connacht-Ulster Alliance in Q4 of this year. So there has been quite a degree of momentum there. I was talking about the South East earlier, and also there's quite a degree of momentum in Limerick Athlone as well. So those 3 applications are in a very positive place. You talked about the hygiene standards in schools, correct. Once we sign off and publish the reopening guidelines and plans and roadmap tomorrow week at Cabinet, within that will be instruction and guidelines and advice for schools. And going back to Deputy O'Leary's point, you know, the extra money that this is going to cost, this is going to cost a lot of money. It's going to cost a lot of extra money, and I'm conscious of that as well, that schools are already under pressure in terms of capitation monies and reductions back in 2011. We've been back 7.5%, but we need to get them back further as well. In relation to the construction project you raised, I'll raise that with the officials, and I think that covers all the issues that you raised. Yeah, thank you.
For your response, and I'm absolutely delighted that you have met with Peter Weir. I think we knew Peter Weir from the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, and it's great to see that cross-border, cross-department cooperation, which is very, very vital across the island of Ireland. So thank you, Minister.
Do you want to conclude, or are we complete?
No, I think, yeah, we're good to go.
Okay, so our next speaker is Deputy Leahy from the Green Party. You have 10 minutes.
Ara is just on debt, continue to student and Kadur Sadalsha. These are certainly testing times for the Minister, and I wish him well in his responsibility to oversee the Leaving Cert in 2020. Today, students should be sitting down to English Paper 2, which would include their comparative studies, but that is not the case now, as we all know. I want to wish well the State Examinations Commission, who are working in unison with Dr. Harold Hislop in the department, along with the various teams of teachers who are collaborating with their colleagues in schools across the country this week in finalising the initial sets of predictive grades for their Leaving Cert students. This is a novel departure in our post-primary sector, and like many issues currently, it is one that has been brought about directly as a result of COVID-19. I am sure that the NCCA will be maintaining a watching brief on how this progresses. The NCCA, of course, have been charged with the task of reforming the Leaving Cert assessments and accreditations so that students at the end of the senior cycle are primed for further study in the 21st century. Minister, you have spoken recently about the potential emergence of blended learning within our schools in the academic year 2020 to 21. This will require a digital upgrade to classrooms around the country. While it is true to say that the Clár Dubh is giving way to smart boards in many places, however, it is not true to say we are close to finishing that transition nationwide. We should extend this digital upgrade to the summer colleges, Sagailtucht, Timple, Natira. Sadly, those custodians of the language will not be in a position to accept students in person this year. Some colleges are making efforts to move their courses online, and it is fantastic to see this ingenuity in real time. Summers in the Gaeltacht offer many their first independent stint away from home, and it is unfortunate that this rite of passage has been put on pause as part of the new normal. The necessity to digitally upgrade our schools speaks directly to the European Commission's plans to help repair and prepare the Union's economies for the future. Next Generation EU is the recovery instrument that will be employed at this juncture and the stimulus will be of the order of €750 billion, the details of which were outlined in Brussels this week by President Ursula von der Leyen. There is a dual aspect to this instrument, along with the digital upgrade, and that is namely the fact that the Commission wants to see this recovery being one that is rooted in green initiatives. The EU wants Member States to set out in detail their plans in this regard. Our students are already discussing the welfare of the planet in CSPE and geography classes. Also, Antashka, through the Green Schools Award, has brought to the fore the importance of environmental management in the minds of teenagers. Schools are developing sustainable systems that respect the importance of protecting water resources and the role of proper waste management. As we know, when the order came for schools to close, in keeping with the NEFIT advice, schools and colleges had to move their teaching overnight onto the cloud, and this was a considerable undertaking which our teachers met with distinction. New systems were put in place to allow teachers to interact with students remotely. As you have alluded to previously, social distancing may require for a level of remote teaching to continue into the academic year. The winds of change are bringing students and teachers to new places. The European Commission recognised that these new worlds will be more digital and will also need to be greener. This could involve retrofitting school buildings where appropriate and the rollout of digital exams in the future where equity of access can be achieved. If we are prepared for this change, then we can benefit in our schools from the fact that is all con gwe nach shaden ma to gina eigen. Accepting that it is very early in the process, Minister, I wish to ask you what preparations are the Department of Education currently making to help Ireland in her application to the Next Generation Fund?
Minister.
Gormaigad agus Gormaid is up the cash fosta agus dúspar bhain and as a goal hugger squarges as the capahan ur fosta agus a more sa role ur atá agad dulgus agus honor more mar capahan mar chacta dala agus a more a mahan shaw. Can take it back to your first contribution around the €750 billion fund. We're working in that world of billions now, and one of the things that I certainly believe is central to any deliberation around funding and that collective response from Europe is to ensure that at the heart of it is how we tackle disadvantage, educational disadvantage, how we ensure that the most vulnerable, which is, even if we think back to the last recession, I think on all the young Donegal people that had to leave and go to Australia and go to Canada and go to the States in a recession, I could see on my own doorstep they were the hardest hit, and you only had to look at the rest of the country, you had to look at Italy, Spain, and look at that massive negative when it came to impact on our younger generation. And I believe that any funding, any conversation around funding stream has to be looking at what we can do to empower young people, but obviously at a focus and at a skill level, how we ensure that their education continues and ensure that there are jobs at the end of the education. So my contribution at a recent round of ministerial meetings at a European Council level, at a European Commission level, when I was with all my counterparts discussing COVID and discussing school reopening and third level and all the challenges that goes with that, was to ensure that whatever funding and support Europe can give is to ensure that we put education at the heart of it. So that brings me to the last question in terms of where we're at in terms of funding. That's my proposition, it's my department's proposition to continue those conversations with my European counterparts, and we're due to meet again at the end of June in 2 weeks' time. You also talked about the digital agenda being to the forefront. The German minister very clearly outlined that their upcoming presidency is going to have a very, very sharp focus on the digital agenda, not just in terms of education, but obviously in the world of work. But one of the things that has been quite clear in the last 3 months, if you look at a tertiary level, the universities were very, very quick to adapt, to continue online lecturing, to do their exams online. Post-primary were quite well equipped in terms of having the experience of Google Classroom and had already started using the investment. We invest a considerable amount of money every year, I think over 60 million at this stage, in terms of digital support for schools. The primary school system has been just our information coming back from the inspectorate. There's really innovative, creative ways of using technology, but whether it's a generation thing or whether there were different reasons for it, it wasn't as interactive in terms of online teaching as, say, compared to post-primary, but there's very valid reasons for that. And look, there were gaps around digital, around broadband, and all the different obstacles that were in place. But one of the clear things coming back from the teaching profession, digital and communication technology, while it did provide some gaps, it's not the solution. We want and we need to continue to ensure that our students are in a classroom setting. And yes, digital communication and technology and new technology can add value to that process, can simplify things. I think one of the learnings that the teachers, one of the simple things during this period, that they didn't have to photocopy, and all the amount of money that's gone into photocopying and getting your now, the expectation was put on some of the parents that they had to copy at a primary school level, and I can attest to that myself. But there were massive learnings. But one of the great insights into this, and this is coming from parents, coming from teachers, and coming from our house where it's a very intense environment at times, homeschooling, where you're trying to mix work and do the homeschooling at the same time. Very, very stressed environments. And we need to get our students back into the classroom, and it's my ambition to continue to work really closely now with the health officials to ensure that we are provided with a roadmap that will ensure that at the end of August, beginning of September, both primary and secondary, that we have a maximum number of students back in the classroom. But I'd be interested to stay in touch with you on if you have suggestions, specific suggestions as to where this fund could be used in education. I'd be very open to that. So thank you again.
Deputy O'Riordan,
Minister, you'll know that the world is saying with one voice at the moment that Black Lives Matter. And I raise this issue because it appears to me we should be cognizant of the fact that we probably stand in probably the whitest parliament in the world, and that our teaching profession should reflect the students that they teach. And we have been, I suppose, remiss in trying to get a teaching profession or get role model professions, if you might suggest, teaching, nursing, guards, that will reflect the general population. And I'm not sure of the statistics of the number of members of the travelling community or people of minority groupings who are in the teaching profession. But I think perhaps in your role, I'd be interested to know what kind of conversations are happening in the Department of Education about promoting such a pathway for people from various different backgrounds to be role models, to be leaders in education. Because I don't know the statistics, but I can only imagine that the teaching profession is probably similar to the political profession. There's a lot we can change in Irish society. Many people will have known of people who sit currently in this House who have said things that they should regret in relation to travellers, in relation to migrants, in relation to asylum seekers. So we have to find mechanisms in every single department as to how we can change attitudes. And many students now sit in classrooms with people with all sorts of different backgrounds now, which is to be welcomed. But the teacher, in most cases, is quite similar. So I just ask you to reflect on that and to see what the Department of Education is doing, or the colleges of teacher training are doing to reach out in order to have, as I say, an education profession, a teaching profession, an SNA profession, which is reflective of the student body. I want to ask about returning to school, because I do get frustrated sometimes when listening to the mixed messaging, has been said before, the difference between how education is treated than how the economy is treated. And we speak about education in very different ways. When you talk about, about retail or about the economy, there's nothing that can't be addressed. Rent can be addressed. Rates can be addressed. Paying your staff can be addressed. But when people talk about schools losing teachers, Minister, you say the system hasn't changed because of COVID. Well, why can't the system change because of COVID? And I mentioned to you last time we spoke about a school in an acutely disadvantaged area, which is one student short of keeping a teacher for September. And every school is going to greatly struggle in September about keeping the show on the road, about getting students back into the classroom. There are secondary school principals who are telling me that we're going to lose a generation. That there are students that they've been clinging on to for years to keep them in the education system, who legally don't have to be there after age 16, who are now making the decision, I'm not going back. Why would I go back? The discontinuation of education has been so profound in their lives that they're unlikely to come back in September. So unless we front load with huge resources and realise how important it is, we're not going to get them back, and we're going to lose a generation. And this is what frustrates about the language that's used. I don't really get the sense of the priority that this is, how huge this is, how enormous this is in September for schools to reopen again, and for young people and children to have the life chance to change maybe the direction in their lives. And it's going to cost money. And people talk about other examples in different European countries. They're putting money into it. They're putting staff into it, Minister. Sanitation's been mentioned. Figures of 25 million is going to cost. I want you to be aware of a project that was undertaken by 4 students in St. Shocknall's National School in Dunshaughlin. I want to send you the details, Minister, so you'll be aware of it, where they have gone and done a project about sanitising in their own school, and they wanted to go nationwide. Laura Kilban, Emily Lynch, Julia Ola Lale, and Adelena Stewart, who are anxious that this project will be taken on by your department and rolled out. I want to ask you, Minister, about safe passes, because again, it appears that there's imagination that could be used by your department which isn't being used. If you need a safe pass, if you're a construction worker or somebody wants to get an apprenticeship, safe pass is everything. But the system hasn't seemed to be able to bend to the new reality. So I'm told, I'm talking to the Connect Trade Union, the trade union movement is willing to step up to the mark, to fill in the gaps that need to be filled. There is an online potential for these courses to be delivered. SULAS are the ones who oversee it. SULAS, unfortunately, are unbending. Minister, this is under your department, so please can you speak to safe passes, how young people or people who require to get a safe pass, who are moving from one jurisdiction back home to Ireland, or moving from one profession to another profession, will not have this pause button on their potential to start work and start their apprentices. Because, again, it appears to me that in some sectors of the economy, government will be all over it and find the solutions, but when it comes to things such as education and, as I say, safe passes, things are unbending. Something else that's unbending, Teaching Council, DRIHID, probation for teachers. You have to have 60 days in the primary school. You have to have 200 hours if you're a secondary school teacher, and nothing after March 13 will count. So you could have a primary school teacher who's done 59 days and is working from March 13th all the way up, doing the online, doing the best they can, trying to educate the children, doesn't count for their probation. And that, again, is another unbending arm of your own department. For some reason, they won't change their ways. So it does meet with a huge amount of frustration for young teachers who are trying to get onto the teaching profession, young people who are trying to get their safe pass, principals who are worried about getting students back in September, principals who are one student. Everything is so unbending in the department. They just won't bend at all. But when it comes to economy and retail and all these other lobbyists who are on the radio every day of the week, the world can change for them. Because people need to buy flights and people need to buy snack boxes in supermarkets. You've mentioned July provision, and I appreciate the fact you've given an awful lot of airtime in this contribution and the previous contribution, and I congratulate you for that. But there is a rolling, ongoing scandal in this country about children who have a diagnosis of autism who don't have a school place in September, and it's going to be compounded this year because of COVID-19. And what happens every year, Minister, I know it's between yourself and the Department of Health, and this is the classic problem in Irish education. When something falls between two departments and both departments have the perfect answer, it's their problem. And so you have parents who are struggling with this diagnosis and this challenge in their family, who are handed a list of schools and say, off you go. And I have parents, and I know you know this, who have 16, 17, 18, 19 schools who have all found mechanisms to say no. Now, you do have power within your own remit under the Admissions School Act to force the school, to demand of a school to open a unit. And I want you to speak to that as well, Minister. In general, what I'm asking you is that these are extraordinary times, and everybody appreciates that, and nobody sitting on any of these seats asking these questions, is not appreciative of the fact that it's a difficult time. But the Department of Education, again, unbending. And as I say it, I'm going to keep saying it. If you're a school and if you're a teacher, the department knows how to deal with you. If you are in any way outside of that, the department doesn't know how to deal with you, or feels it can't deal with you, and doesn't have any empathy towards the situations. So look, I've asked some very specific questions, Minister. If you don't have the time to respond to them individually, I'd appreciate it in a written form.
Okay, I'll try. I'll work my way back, actually, if they're written here. Look, just the good news on what's happened between the Department of Education officials and the Department of Health over the last few weeks and working the summer programme, I think there's been a sea change there. I think we're looking at the school inclusion model that we all want to work towards, where a child needs a physio or an OT or a speech and language. You're right. There were two different departments working separately from each other, and there's been a sea change. We're working on the summer programme, 600 children with complex medical needs, along with disadvantaged kids, along with SEN kids, looking to get them that summer programme. We're working really together, and I want to acknowledge the officials on that. Teaching Council issue you raised in the Safe Pass, can I just say, the department's not unbending. Rules are there, and obviously rules to meet different needs have to change. I'm actively considering that Safe Pass issue, and I'm also like to let you know that the Teaching Council is actively considering that probation issue as well. So hopefully we'll have news on those two fronts. Not too distant. Give me 60 more seconds. I'll get this squared up, because I want to. Your first point was really interesting. St Shacknell's, yeah, be interested in that. Send me on that stuff. Look, the rules for the end of September for the. It's pupil-teacher ratio. You said it yourself. It's a financial, it's a budgetary consideration. There's a budget coming up in 3 months' time, July, August, September. The budget's done and dusted for the last week in September, so there, even before the Minister for Finance gets to do it, I've announced that the next budget, whoever is going to be in charge then. But look, I do take your point, and I have asked the Inspector to look at that school issue in Darndale that you raised before, and I've asked them to look, and I'm waiting for them to get back to me on that. Last point, you're absolutely 100% right in relation to creating pathways to reflect our society. And that's why I ensured that a project, you might be familiar with it in Marino, they've been really showing great leadership in Marino around this. It's a migrant project where they've brought in mature students from different countries who are living here now, citizens of Ireland, maybe been a former French teacher, maths teacher in Spain or whatever. The migrant project is looking at an induction into the Irish education system. It was formerly funded by the Department of Justice. I had to go for the funding of it. It was only €50,000, but it identified exactly what we need to do in this country. So I think, if you want to familiarise yourself with that project, but I think that's something that we can build on. It's really important to reflect society.
Minister. So the next deputy is Deputy Gannon. You have 10 minutes, and if I could appeal to all deputies, if you want to allow time for the Minister to respond, you'll have to do it within your own time frame, because we're limited on the time because of the COVID restrictions.
Chair. I'm very conscious that as we sit here today discussing education, students who otherwise would be doing their exams for their junior, their leaving cert, or taking part in their skill tours in primary school are now sitting at home. And the backdrop, in addition to a pandemic that is impacting them in a multitude of different ways, the backdrop is now they turn on their TVs, their social media, and what they're faced with is pictures coming from their screen of racial injustice and state-sponsored violence in the US. And I think it's important we acknowledge that and we understand it. and we try to position ourselves in terms of those images and what we can do. And I join my colleagues in expressing my thoughts and my solidarity with everyone protesting police brutality and racism. The killing of George Floyd and the countless other black men and women by police is absolutely something that must be protested. It is the inexcusable structural racism that allows innocent black men and women to be killed by police forces without consequence, and the unique brand of politics that excuses these killings and breeds fear and sows division must end. People power, protest and worldwide expressions of solidarity are the only way to do this, and we in the Social Democrats stand in full solidarity with protesters on the Black Lives Matter demonstration, both here and abroad. This is an important moment to reflect on racism and the discrimination that exists in our own country. I have made the point on several occasions in this chamber that diversity matters. In a representative democracy, it is important that a person can witness some semblance of their own likeness as they engage with the structures of the state. It is what this thought that was foremost in my mind as I prepared for the Dáil session on education today. As we pursue a pathway to return to normality, I'm conscious of what normality has been for students from minority backgrounds in Ireland to this point. Marion Roy Enderman famously said, "You can't be what you can't see." And if that's true, our students from low-income backgrounds, students of colour, students with disabilities, students from traveller backgrounds and ethnic minority groupings, they cannot see themselves in the teaching community in Ireland. It's a point that's been made in the previous speaker, but we're going to elaborate on it a little bit more. The Department of Education and Skills data show that in the period between 2013 and 14, 1 in 9 primary school children was from a non-Irish background. In our second level schools, 1 in 8 students is born overseas. Lekiela Secondary School in Turtlestown reports 67 nationalities making up their student cohort, but this diversity is not reflected in our teacher professions. Diversity in initial teacher education found that in a study of new primary school teachers in 2014, that 99% of respondents identified as white, Irish and settled, and 100% specified either English or Irish as their first language. For our secondary school teachers, the picture is much the same. Over 98% of those cohort in 2013 and 99% in 2014 entrants expressed their originality as being Irish nationality only or Irish nationality with an additional nationality. There are some positives, Minister, you've mentioned, and I want to touch on the programme you mentioned, because it's a really worthwhile programme. And I really applaud your department and the Departments of Justice and Equality's funding of the Marine and Migrant Teacher Bridging Programme that allows migrants with educational qualifications on a one-year course to become qualified teachers in Ireland. But 40 teachers progressed from that course last year, and that's simply not enough. Dr. Emer Nolan, who you'll know, who's a course coordinator there, has said that there's been taken aback by the huge interest in the programme. She quotes, "We have 600 teachers on our mailing list now, and 140 applied to enrol in our current bridging programme. Unfortunately, we could only accommodate 40, so we had to apply selection criteria, which took a number of factors into account, including teacher qualifications and their progress through the Teaching Council registration process." Minister, I'm going to appeal to you today. That is an incredibly worthwhile initiative, which you clearly value. I think we need to widen the scope of it and to bring more teachers through that same process. When I think about racism that replicates itself and becomes ingrained in our society, I can't help but think about the plight of our traveller community. And of course, that goes much deeper than simple representation. We need to reflect on the terrible history of racism in this country and the treatment of travellers by the state. Every day, travellers in Ireland experience a denial of their identity, direct and indirect racism. At an individual level, travellers are denied access to public businesses. Children have expressed being bullied in school. They are denied being called to interviews based on their address. On a structural level, we've seen an appalling lack of political will to deliver upon traveller accommodation, with city councils returning traveller accommodations budget unspent each year. We see that inequality and that racism compounded further when we look at the deep educational inequality experienced by travellers in Ireland every day. That manifests itself in a multitude of different ways. But we even see the denial of traveller culture being placed onto the syllabus, or even look at an inability to access third-level education with only 167 travellers of any age expressing having a third-level qualification. That simply isn't acceptable. And when I think about the skills that I've been in when I worked in the Trinity Access programme going into desk skills, one of the saddest things I've seen and it's a real shameful indictment of us as a country, is children who are born in Ireland who are still feeling the shameful consequence of that 2004 referendum which denies them citizenship. Anyone in this third Dáil who is committed to confronting racism in this country needs to commit ourselves to removing that horrendous consequence of that referendum. And we don't need to have another referendum to deal. We shouldn't be going around asking people if they're good enough to live in this country. This Parliament can do it, and we should. We should commit ourselves in the 33rd Dáil. I'm going to move on to a different issue. The Taoiseach mentioned today in his contributions that the Covid payment would now be reduced for people who weren't previously working full-time when the pandemic started in February. Minister, that is going to have a profound impact on students who may not have been working full-time in February, but they certainly would be working full-time now. And they'd be working full-time now so they could cover the cost of potentially their registration fees. You might say Susie will do that, but Susie certainly doesn't do that for everybody. They'd be working full-time to cover the cost of their rent. They'd be working full-time to cover the cost of the further than the point of entry access requirements of books, stationery. And if we're removing this COVID payment, full COVID payment from that cohort who would be working full-time now, it's going to have a terrible consequence for them. So I would appeal to you at the meeting that you're going to be having tomorrow with the Taoiseach to stand up for students in this country, to say that those who would be working full-time now, students or any other cohort, they're going to be impacted by this measure, and it's simply not acceptable. I want to talk a little bit about the 993 students who didn't register for the predictive grading. You've mentioned them in your opening address, Minister, and I really respect that. We cannot let this cohort go. We need to find out who they are. We need to find out the reasons by which they may not have registered themselves for calculated grades, and we need to be sure we offer them every single opportunity to be treated the same as any other student in this country. Minister, you've mentioned your engagement with schools and your department's engaging with schools, but they're simply, from talking to schools, and we talk to schools all the time, they contact us. I'll give you an indication of the last contact I've had from schools just this morning was a school ringing me up asking about school bus places. For when students come back, if we are going back in September, simply getting their students onto a bus. Are these considerations being taken? In an urban environment that for me is Dublin bus being crammed at 8:30 in the morning, I'm sure it's different in a rural context, but under social distancing, that's simply not going to be possible. So I hope you're considering that also. I'll leave it there. Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, I suppose just to reassure the Deputy, absolutely, the bus transportation is a key factor in our deliberations in terms of what end of August, September look like, and also for the summer programme as well. We're looking at the practicalities around that as well. Certainly, the feedback from the teachers and the teacher representative bodies they're looking at everything. They're looking at the setup in the morning, and what will be needed in terms of hygiene, in terms of sanitisers, and all sorts of criteria and all sorts of instruction as well in terms of training and guidance for teachers. And I do accept that there's a sense of urgency that teachers and principals and boards of management, they need to know what August and September will look like as soon as possible. And that's why I committed at last Friday's Cabinet meeting to set out a time frame, and the time frame is very, very specific. Towards the end of next week, we're going to have guidelines published for schools for a roadmap for what end of August, September looks like. It's really, really important for schools to plan, because there will be a lot of planning. Your issue you raised in relation to the COVID payment, it's a good point and it's a valid point, and there's a lot of students, even Leaving Cert students now, even from my own county and my own parish, they rely on tourism. They're getting no payment, but not all students got the COVID payment either. So there was an inequality there in terms of the COVID payment. It was only the students that were in part-time jobs. So there is an annoyance amongst other students that may have been in part-time employment maybe a couple of months previously or whatever. So there is an inequity there amongst all students.
When we move on now to the Solidarity People Before Profit, Deputy Kenny and Deputy Barry, I believe you're sharing?
Yes, Chair.
5 minutes
Chair,
each?
yeah, shared in 5 minutes each.
Thank you.
Minister, I know we've spoke about this issue on a weekly basis at this stage in relation to July provision and special needs education. There was a report on RTE News on Tuesday. I don't know if you've seen it yourself. It was heartbreaking to see them two families in that situation, and it was just terrible to see the kind of distress and the anxiety where parents are going through with children with kind of complicated needs, where there's no outlet, there's no routine, and it's very, very, very difficult. And that routine, not having that routine, is extremely, extremely difficult, not only for the children but also the family. And it's I think the sooner the better. There is structure, but can you give structure and a definitive answer in relation to the July programme to them families? Is there going to be a July programme come July? Because I just think families in that situation just can't take any more.
To answer your question, yes, there most definitely will. It'll be different to previous July provisions because it won't just be exclusive to autism. We're widening it out. We've got upwards on 8,000 students in our ASD classes, with 8,000 students in special schools, so that's 16,000 straight away. But we want to add to that number as well. We want to look at disadvantage. We want to look at school completion programmes, which we talked the last 2 weeks ago when we engaged in this issue. So the answer is quite clearly yes. But what I want to do, I want to have it right. And that's why we're going to be continuing to engage now with the public health officials, because we need to comply with the guidelines. But also, I want to give certainty here to parents, and I want parents to be confident that this is the right thing for their students. Or for their children. But for some children, it may be in the home. So that option has to be there for parents, because last year, believe it or not, out of the 10,000 students that participated in the July provision, you were looking at 70% was actually in the home. So that obviously requires buy-in from your SNAs, from your tutors, from your teachers. So my plea today is to the school leadership, and at the outset the feedback has actually been incredibly positive, where school leaders are very, very anxious to make this happen. But out of 4,000 schools in our country, only 232 schools opened up for the July provision last year. So it's not all about opening up schools en masse, it's about seeing what has worked in previous years, but seeing what we can build on as well. But one point I want to make in relation to SNAs, SNAs never give up the contact once the schools closed on 12th of March. And you'll know that yourselves from your evidence from the schools. They've stayed in touch with the students, and I have a list of some of I asked my officials, give me examples of good practice that's happening. I have a list as long as my arm here in terms of what some schools are doing. They're ringing the parents. Some of them are ringing the parents every day. They're in touch with the son or daughter every day. They're keeping that connectivity going. And the SNAs under the redeployment scheme, there now is a percentage of SNAs working with the HSE, working with programmes at the HSE. So there's been enormous and incredible interlocking between the Department of Health and the Department of Education, and I think that bodes well to the future. But look, sorry for going on. I know your question was simply yes or no, but the answer is yes.
Will it begin at the end of June, kind of start of July?
Yeah, we'd be looking at next week, contacting the schools, and we're looking to start at the beginning of July. Yeah.
Minister, just another question in relation to children in disadvantaged areas. Will there be provision for that cohort of students, particularly around over the summer period? Because as we were speaking last week, a lot of students have not been in school since March the 13th, and especially particularly around disadvantage children. Some students will just drop out, so there has to be a lot of kind of resources put to particularly them students. What's the department's plans? And also, I just read there in relation to online supports in relation to the July provision. What would that contain? Because sometimes the outlet is the routine of going outside the family home. That's it's so essential, and giving the parents kind of some sort of break. So what online kind of provision is entailed in July provision?
Well, look, I'm reluctant to give a picture of what this is going to look like, because we're not announcing it formally to next week. I'm going to go to Cabinet. I'm going to bring a memo to Cabinet. We're going to publish the guidelines. But just to let you know, I'll give you two examples. We're looking at, in terms of disadvantage, we're looking at school completion. So that would be targeted disadvantage to try and get some form of school completion continued. We're also looking at, for example, literacy and numeracy in JESH schools. At the moment, there's only 70 schools that does that summer programme in literacy and numeracy. So I'm looking to build upon that and to extend it. So there are two examples. But look, next week we'll have more clarification.
Minister, last Saturday's Irish Times reported the following. It is understood that the Department is exploring the idea of a tapered curriculum when schools return. Some elements of the junior cycle are being curtailed, with incoming third-year students now required to complete a single classroom-based assessment in most subjects rather than two. Minister, can I ask you to clarify that this is indeed the case? And can I ask whether you are considering a tapered curriculum for next year's Leaving Cert students, the class of 2021. You know my position, Minister. You know I believe that the Leaving Cert is unnecessarily stressful, is biased against students from low-income families, is an outlier now in terms of European second-level education, that there should be a massive increase in state spending on third level to really open it up, and that the review of the Leaving Cert should consider abolition of the exam and alternatives in time for the class of 2021. But can I suggest to you that if you plan to taper the course for the fifth years, that it would need to be a very significant tapering, given that those students have lost 1/3 of their classroom time for the year 2019-2020. Now, Minister, the world watched with horror the police murder of George Floyd, and many, myself included, watch with admiration the multiracial uprising of young people in the US against the President, against police forces, and against an entire system that is riddled with inequality and with racism. But demonstrations across the world have not only expressed solidarity, they have also pointed towards the racism that exists within their own societies. And here in Ireland, many young people of colour and many travellers who have joined the protests have highlighted the issue of racism in society and in our education system. It exists and it needs to be tackled. Now, we know that migrant children are overrepresented in larger schools, schools in urban areas and schools in socio-economically disadvantaged areas. We also know that school outcomes are far from equal, that 20%, for example, of migrant children drop out of school, double the rate for non-migrant children, that a mere 1% of students from a traveller background go on to third-level education. We have to look at the experience of the education system through the eyes of students from minority backgrounds. I would be interested, for example, to hear from students from minority backgrounds about their experience of the education system in this country. While schools officially have an anti-racist ethos, to what extent is this really followed through on to become a thoroughgoing ethos which pervades all aspects of school life? How much black history, for example, would be learned by a black student in an Irish school? How much traveller history would be learned by a traveller student in an Irish school? And by non-black and non-traveller students to raise their level of understanding on these issues. So, Minister, I'm asking you to comment on your plans to improve the anti-racist ethos in the education system and also anti-racist outcomes. What comments might you make on that? Thank you.
Minister, you just have 1 minute.
Less than 1 minute, Chairman, but let me be very clear in the education model we have in this country. We have an inclusive educational model, and it's not just an urban thing, it's not just a rural thing. And if I point to my own town of Letterkenny, one of the primary schools, I think it's 38 nationalities. And I was at an event, and all ethnicity around the world, it's a global school, and one of the students summarised the school and said, we're an international school steeped in the history of Letterkenny. You know, we have something really good going on in this country in terms of what's happening, inclusiveness, and ensuring that we embrace all ethnicity and people that are the new Irish, new citizens. And the students I meet and the students I've met over the last 19 months in this job, they absolutely know that they're safe in that environment. So I think it's important to point out the positives, Deputy, in relation to what's going on in this country in terms of education. Yes, we can do more, we can improve, but a lot of good things. The schools, it's transformative in terms of that inclusive nature. So I think it's important to point that out. You raised the issue of NCCA or of the curriculum being tapered and speculation in a weekend newspaper. What I will confirm here today is there is discussions going on between the NCCA and me officials in relation to the curriculum. I am conscious of the fifth years, raised here by a number of deputies, yourself, consistent, it's the same issue over and over again, and fair play to you for raising it. By raising it, it keeps it in my radar, and my officials are listening, and we keep it on the agenda. But what I also want to do for the fifth years, I'm looking at the benefits of what happened with School Hub for the primary school. We're having discussions with RTE to see is there a space there for fifth years as they start in terms of what they've lost out as well. But yes, there are discussions going on between the NCCA and the officials.
Minister. Deputy Tobin for the regional group.
Minister, first of all, I want to welcome the indemnification of teachers by the state with regards to the leaving cert. It's something that we have been calling in aim to for weeks now at this stage, so it is good news to see. But I'd like if the Minister could tell the Dáil what money has been set aside for this indemnification, and will it come from the Department of Education? So that's my first question. The next question, Minister, is in relation to concerns that still exist within the teaching community with regards to the new Leaving Cert system and its potential to be corrupted in the future. Now, I want to emphasise from the start that I believe wholeheartedly that the vast majority of the stakeholders within the education system are going to see this system through to the best of their ability to make sure that everybody gets fair marks. But in every system, obviously, human nature plays a part, and a minority of situations will lead to difficulties. And I can foresee that there will be whistleblowers within the system that will come forward with these difficulties in the futures. It has already been reported to me that some principals and some school boards of management have sought to elevate grades. It has already been reported to me that some parents and some students have sought to elevate grades. And in small towns and villages across the country, that's going to be very, very difficult to deal with. I'm also conscious that negative relationships that may exist between a teacher and a student may result in lower grades for that student. It's been reported to me, Minister, too, of a teacher giving paid grinds in school to students of another teacher leaving cert class, and that teacher openly attending an alignment meeting and then commenting on that student's grade. And what can we do to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future? I've been told of schools insisting that teachers go to these school meetings to meet colleagues, even though your document states that that work can be done remotely as well. And younger teachers and teachers in need of CIDS or teaching hours next year can be under pressure to be compliant. So just to reiterate, I know that these allegations are being made. They are a minority of cases, and I understand that most of the stakeholders in the system are going to do their job to the highest quality that they can. But the Minister has embarked upon this marking system, and he has ignored the requests of the unions to rely on more concrete aspects of the education system, such as summer exams, Christmas exams, and the mocks as well. And I'm asking the Minister, what's in place in the process to prevent these problems or to address them as they arise? And also, given the fact that we're likely to be living with this virus for not just this year, maybe into next year, is the government working on a system other than the ad hoc system that we have currently that will give more reliability and more stability to teachers, parents and students into the future? The second question I have for the Taoiseach, or for the not Taoiseach yet, for the Minister here today is teachers and parents across the country are none the wiser with regards to return of schools in late August and September. And the media currently is awash with speculation, this precious little detail there, and it's causing massive stress for parents currently. We hear about pods of 4, we hear about tapered classes and courses, partial opening, some children remaining at home while others go to school. And I know of schools in my own constituency that are brand new, and that if you use the 2-metre social distancing space, will at tops allow for about 10 students to make it into the class. And most of the classrooms in my constituency wouldn't come near to that level of space that exists there. And indeed, there are heaps of schools right across everybody's constituencies who are waiting for years for additions to their school premises so that they could actually properly facilitate the students that are already there under the old regime there. So will the Minister give proper clarity with regards to this? The uncertainty from the Department of Education is really strange, given that the WHO have actually said that Ireland already meets the criteria for schools to go back now. And you know, the Taoiseach is on the record to saying the schools are amongst the lowest risk categories that exist within society for COVID-19. So, in an effort to stop this constant speculation, will the Minister give concrete clarity and clear the confusion up? I also want to speak with regards, if I can, and ask a question about children with special needs, Minister, and July provision. I know you've answered some of the questions here, so I won't go over them, but obviously the parents and children with special needs have been particularly badly hit by the lockdown and the cancellation of education. And children with special needs do far better with structure and do far better when they have regular engagement with a highly trained professional educator. And we've seen in news reports and elsewhere parents really struggle with the pressure of 24/7 minding and educating of their children. We've seen these children with complex needs suffer greatly from the lack of education. So they are radically disadvantaged, more so probably than any other category of school child. So I'm asking, Minister, will you see to it that education starts now for children with complex special needs? And will the Minister guarantee the return of the July provision? Now, I know that the Minister said that they are looking at, and I'm here 10 years, and the words like endeavouring to do and looking at often hide the fact that there are actually no concrete plans and decisions have not been made. So what I'm looking for is a guarantee to send out to the parents of these 10,000 children now that some educational structure will come back into the lives of these children now as well. Just final question, final two questions. It's really important, I think, that departments and ministers make decisions with all of the facts that are being given to them. So I'd actually like to ask the Minister what research has been done by his department with regards to the cost in educational terms to students by what's happened at the moment. And if he could refer specifically to at-risk students, because we know that the school system is a great space for at-risk students to have some level of monitoring to make sure that they're safe and that they're okay. And also, what are the financial costs to the state with regards to this as well? And finally, if I can, a university for the North West, Minister, it's obviously a massive interest to yourself. People in Derry are looking for it as well. We know that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael mentioned it in their manifestos. There's negotiations going along. Will it appear in the programme for government? Gurmagat.
Okay, thank you. Just firstly, in relation to the alignment process, you're correct in saying the alignment process has started in terms of estimating grades. With daily interaction now between the teachers, teaching colleagues, deputy principals. So that work will continue. And the executive office that has been set up now in the department is up and running. We have an independent monitoring group chaired by Dr. Anya Lawler. There's a lot of checks and balances in there, and I know we're going to hear different examples and different anecdotes, but the general feedback I'm getting is one where teachers are working collaboratively with the whole school community, words like conscientious, committed, dedicated, and they want to get it right. And it's a difficult space to be in, because 12 weeks ago, if you were to walk down Navan Main Street and say, by the way, Leaving Cert's not going ahead this year, we're going to introduce a whole new calculated grades model, but we're going to do that in 12 weeks. And I think it's something, I'm going to take this opportunity to acknowledge the dedication of my own, not my own staff, the Department of Education staff and officials for all their work and their ability to adapt, but to assure again there are checks and balances. It's not the perfect system, Deputy, and I agree with you. It's not the perfect system. It's not the one that I wanted. I wanted the written exam, but it's a fairest system under the circumstances. Second point around school reopening. Next Friday, I'll bring a memo to Cabinet around the criteria and guidelines about school reopening, and we'll bring that certainty to parents and obviously to school communities as well. In relation to special educational needs, it's not going to be the normal July provision because I'm going to widen it. It's not going to just be exclusive to autism. We're also going to be looking at educational disadvantage and other students as well. There's going to be a big role by the Department of Health for 600 children with complex medical needs. So we will have information as part of that memo on Friday as well. Unfortunately, I'm going to be in this House again next Wednesday, Chairperson, but it'll be the end of the week before I have the before I have the memo to government. So I'm going to be in the exact same position saying we're going to be producing a memo in 2 days' time. But I would encourage you, maybe now publicly in this chamber here today, to use next Wednesday as an opportunity to put your proposals as to what you think should be incorporated into. I think that's a good democratic opportunity.
I have to move on because, sorry, Deputy, I can't because...
It's a state indemnification, so it's like anything, things can arise, but it'll be the offices of the AG will be dealing with that in terms of costs, and obviously teachers are indemnified. That has been guaranteed. That has been a cabinet decision made indemnification to protect teachers in this process. So that is secure. So whatever costs arising will be borne by the state.
So now we move on to Deputy Collins, who is sharing with Deputy Healy-Rae 5 minutes each.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. Minister, island living has not been easy through this COVID crisis, and with 8 great islands in West Cork, every effort must be made to keep young families living there. Sherkin Island National School closed its doors in June 2016. For 4 years, they have been trying to secure adequate access to education for the island's children. Their success over these 4 years has been hard-won. These successes are they have secured additional ferry to primary school children, and that the ferry times line up with the school times. It is at times hard to believe it has taken them 4 years to achieve this. However, there is still a way to go to have mainland equality when it comes to accessing education for island children. You are our Minister for Education throughout this. There are many emotional and physical aspects to this situation. However, in this attempt, I will lay it out as follows. The main barrier is in the cost of sending a child to school from the island, and this being Sherkin Island. The maximum a family on the mainland pays for access to primary education for a family, irrespective of the number of children, is $220 per term. Island families are paying this in a 2-week period, increasing with the number of children. This is a clear discrimination between access to education from an island and from the mainland. The primary school in Sherkin closed, yet they have 4 children in the local mainland school and another 6 children in the coming years. This type of financial burden on island families in the current climate may ultimately move them off the island. The islands are in real danger of losing their families. If the islands are to survive, this needs to be rectified with an immediate effect. And I am now asking you, how do we rectify this clear anomaly in accessing education for an island child in comparison to the mainland child? Also, Minister, in West Cork, some Leaving Cert students seem to have fallen through a crack in the predictive grade system. Those who want to study medicine next year and require a third language to get a place in the course. They didn't do a language in school, so they decided to teach themselves French from home. They had already done French up until 4th year, and some achieved a B at higher level in the junior cert, so they were confident in their ability to get a pass in RD level for their Leaving Cert. Due to the fact they were teaching themselves and had no teacher to give them a predicted grade, all their work may have been for nothing if they have to sit a written exam. Whenever that becomes a possibility, they will miss out on a year of university due to a fault in the system. Minister, is there anything that can be done for these young people who have had the initiative to teach themselves? And Minister, the people of secondary school going children in Bandon are sick to the teeth of promises that have been so badly broken down through the years. They were being told even a few months ago to educate their children in Cork City, as there were no spaces in Bandon in September. Another announcement has been made to build 19 general classrooms, 3 science labs, 5 set rooms, 2 prep areas, 1 art room, 1 textile room, 1 home economic room and 2 classroom spaces in an already overcrowded area in St. Brogan's. Minister, when will the shovel turn on this project and when will the new school open? And what have the Department of Education planned for abandoned school-going children this and next year? And I would like to welcome your announcement a while ago about the July provision will go ahead next year. That's greatly welcome, Minister, and thank you.
Minister, quite a few questions there for you. You have 2 minutes.
You're in full steam ahead there, Deputy. I just want to acknowledge the Sherkin Island community. I know I've met with them there, I've been there twice, and really innovative approaches and how they're even involved with, I think it's DCU on an art project as well, so really, really creative. And look, I would just say here today, Deputy, like, you know, we've had a great example in Limerick, Glenroe National School, which is looking to opening up in September. So there's nothing to say a school can't open again in the future. And my confidence from looking around my own county and looking at, for example, Ironmore Island, where they have 2 primary schools, they have a secondary school, they have nearly 50 students coming from the mainland on a daily basis to go to the island school. And they've set up this new digital hub where they're going to be attracting people back to the island. So it's only a prediction, but my prediction for the future of islands, I think it's going to be a positive one as a result of broadband being available on islands, and whether it's Kerry or Donegal or West Cork, I think you're going to be looking at positive changes in the movement of people, because if Facebook and Google are announcing in Dublin that people can work from home, I mean, there's no reason why they can't work from the southern part of the country or the northern part of the country either. So what I would say to you here today is, if the community, if the Sherkin Island community believe that in 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years' time that there's you've already seen a progression from 4 students going to 6 students. I mean, that, you know, there's a school in Donegal had 11 students in 1999. It now has 85 students. You know, momentum happens once it gets started. So I would never discount the idea of a primary school being on Sherkin Island. And if there's help we can, advice we can give in relation to that process, I'd be happy to get my officials
Minister,
to
I'm going to leave in Deputy.
Oh, sorry. I thought it the whole time from myself. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I don't want to fall out.
We might get the rest of the answers in relation to banding, maybe in writing.
Yeah, we'll do that. Yeah.
Thank you, Minister, and I want to especially thank you for being engaged and responding at your best to every query that you're getting. You seem to be on top of everything. But I suppose, Minister, for my part, I suppose I need to emphasise and ask you that schools need to know as soon as possible what the picture will look like at the beginning of September or late in August. I mean, there's going to be a massive difference. Is the 1 metre? Are we going to reduce the need to 1 metre as opposed to 2 metres? At present, we need to know what it's going to look like, because if it's still going to be 2 metres distancing, people are worrying that all classes won't be entertained on the one day like they used to be in school. So that needs to be clarified, Minister, and maybe you won't be able to say next Friday whether the 1 metre or the 2 metre rule will apply, but surely you should be able to say it'll look like this if it's still 2 metres, or it's going to look like this if it's going to be 1 metre. We need to know, and teachers and schools and management need to know, because they'll need more room. And I mean, more room is available in community halls, and just take a place like Guinea-Gwilla. There's a local community group there, and they have a lovely hall. It's called a house, Takfalte, and it's only a step away from the school that's already overcrowded. So we need time to interact and to get, to see how those matters can be resolved. And I suppose in relation to the school buses, we need to know, Minister, a 30-seater school bus, how many children will be allowed to sit in the 30, what the story will be. And surely someone somewhere will be able to define for each type of size of bus, the large, the medium or the small bus, how many they can take. We need to know those kind of things, and Bus Éireann needs to know, and we need to get out there and let the private contractors and Bus Éireann indeed as well themselves, they need to know. That has to be known, Minister, sooner rather than later. I want to thank you especially for the special needs education, and we asked you to include the Down syndrome, and I hope that those children will be afforded the direct the July provision as well, and that it will be one-to-one and not online or anything like that, because that's not sufficient for those. And parents of special needs children, they've had a really tough time for the last three months now, and you often find where they have one child, some of them have two, and that's double the effect. So we need to know, Minister, what's going to happen, because if children will have to stay at home for days, their social development is going to be compromised. It already has been compromised by the very fact they haven't been meeting each other in schools for the last 3 months. So I'm appealing to do what he can to open up the schools and let the people know what the picture is going to be like. Maybe you'd answer me for some couple of things, and what you don't get time, you might respond in writing. And thank you very much, Minister.
Minister, very important question about the school transport.
It's like closing time here. I've just got a short wonder here, Deputy. You're right, schools need to know the picture, so that's why I'll be bringing a memo to Cabinet next Friday. With that picture, not just for school reopenings in late August, early September, but also the special educational needs and disadvantage bit. And look, I know there's a big debate around the 2-metre rule and the 1-metre rule and all that. We all live in the real world in terms of what a junior infants class and a senior infants class looks like. And if we're expecting junior infants and senior infants, or first class or second class, to look at those societal parameters that we've laid down, we need to be looking at what's the science around students. We already know that under 13-year-olds don't have to wear PPE gear, and I certainly don't even want to see PPE gear in secondary schools. But that's not, I'm not a public health official. That's my own personal opinion. That's what I would like to see, because I've seen the photographs of South Korea. There are little pods. There are little pods in the canteen and all that, and it was just like, anyway, I won't say what it was like, but it was just a very difficult thing to process. And I
Minister,
certainly
sorry, I'm going to have to stop you because we've only a few minutes left for our last two speakers. I really am up against the clock here.
And just on Down syndrome, yeah, it's not going to be exclusive to autism. We're going to widen it out. And two most important words for parents: it's choice. Choice, do they want it done in the house? And you're right, if we can get somebody to go into the house, a tutor or a teacher into that house, that's a possibility. But also if we can open up a school, that is a choice as well. But the most important word as well from the tutor and SNA and teacher's point of view, it has to be voluntary. And that was one of the positives of the July provision. It was always voluntary, and that's why it worked.
Thank you, Minister. So to conclude, we have Deputy Harkin and Deputy Connolly sharing, I presume, 5 minutes each?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And can I say, I really welcomed your last statement. As you said, you dealt with the reality of what it's like in schools. So I'm glad to hear it. But I was listening to the debate. I'm conscious of the COVID restrictions, so I was in my office and I heard all your answers. And you've answered on July provision.